Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Wednesday to you. Hopefully you've had a great week so far. Welcome to Let's Talk Tropics. On this Wednesday afternoon, we are looking at a gorgeous day across Acadiana this time around, and I think it's going to stay that way for the remainder of the afternoon as well. Looks like we're going to have some fine weather here for the next couple of days. In fact, let's go ahead and see what we've got going on right now. Looks like our temperatures are hovering right around the 90-degree mark, and it does appear that we're going to continue to see those lower dew points and that low humidity as well. It's down to 44% with that dew point at 65 with a light breeze out of the north at around 3 miles per hour. As far as our traffic cams, we're looking great there. Mostly sunny skies, very dry out there. Again, it's kind of hard to believe that it's August, and I have gotten a few comments on social media here about shorter days and people getting ready for fall, and I think it's just because of the change of the lighting as well as these drier conditions that are kind of kickstarting everybody into fall. But it is only August the 21st, and we've got a long way to go. And but again, enjoy it while it lasts, because by the time we get into the weekend, I think the humidity levels are going to be back up. Our frontal boundary is way out in the Gulf of Mexico right now. It kind of stretches out like this, and we've got some thunderstorms that have fired up along the upper Texas coast, but right now we're not looking at any problems on land, and in fact the rest of Acadiana is currently dry right now, and I don't expect any showers or thunderstorms to develop this afternoon. So let's get into the tropics. There is not a lot going on right now. Now that Ernesto has made its way out of the way, we have no active tropical systems out there, which is somewhat unusual as we get into the second third of August, or going into the last third of August here. But we've got some showers and thunderstorms along a frontal boundary over the Gulf of Mexico. And over the next couple of days, we'll watch for kind of an area of low pressure to develop. I think it's going to be more in the mid and upper levels, not down at the surface. If we were looking at the possibility of a surface low developing along this front here, I'd be a little bit more concerned. And models late last week were trying to pick on maybe something developing here along this front. But I think now if anything's going to develop along that front, it's probably going to be more likely over the Atlantic, where the front does extend out over the central part of the Atlantic. As far as the waves and the winds that are out in the offshore waters, we're looking at northeast winds today, maybe up to 15 knots and some higher gusts, but 5 to 10 is going to be a pretty good bet, with the seas about 1 to 3 feet. 2 to 4, though, as you get closer to some of those bigger thunderstorms, it might be along the front, but you've got to go pretty far offshore to reach that. As far as the Central American satellite, we've got some showers and thunderstorms again down along the Panamanian coast, and a few widely scattered showers trying to develop along the Yucatan to around Belize, and the rest of the Caribbean is very quiet as well. We've got some good trade winds that are moving across the Caribbean, but fair skies for the most part. A couple of isolated showers there south of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, with some more moisture that pushes a little bit farther out into the Atlantic. And we've got a couple of tropical waves that are out there, but nothing really looking too interesting. One tropical wave probably right about in here, and another good tropical wave that's starting to come off the African coast. And I think this area here will start to get a little bit more active maybe about a week to 10 days from now. As far as what we've got going on in the Atlantic right now, you got a pretty big ridge of high pressure, so anything that would develop out over the middle part of the Atlantic would most likely make its way off toward the north and turn around that big ridge of high pressure that's out here. So right now, I don't think we're going to see any development over the Gulf of Mexico nor over the Caribbean this time around. The Eastern Atlantic, again, showing that larger tropical wave. Some models are trying to get some development in this particular area, maybe out here, and then turning more in this particular direction, kind of turning more toward the northwest. But we'll kind of have to wait and see, because the models just don't seem to be too excited about that particular tropical wave that's moving off the African coast. So, according to the National Hurricane Center, there is no tropical cyclone activity expected for the next week or so. So we're going to go through the model suites and just kind of show you what we've got for about the next 10 days or so. And then I'm going to also show you a few graphics farther down the road showing you what's kind of preventing some of this activity from developing. And then thirdly, we'll go in and just kind of remind you, just like I reminded you earlier, that even though it feels pretty good out there, it is not fall yet, And even though the tropical systems don't seem to be coming in these big numbers that we were expecting earlier in the season, we're not in September yet, is what I like to say, because that's when things really start to get going. So let's start out with the GFS, this one going through the next 10 days. The GFS model does go out considerably farther than just 10 days, but the model run wasn't quite finished as we started here at noon. But going out 10 days, there are a couple of tropical waves of note and maybe a little more action starting to come off of the African coast here and moving off toward the west. And the only hint I can see of any other low pressures developing is probably along a frontal boundary here, maybe over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, but I really think this area here would be more prime for any tropical systems to develop along that front and then continue to move away from the U.S. coastline. The Euro model is very similar. Again, we've got that big ridge of high pressure that's currently centered over the east central part of the Atlantic Ocean, so everything would try to turn a little bit more like that and not really affect the Gulf of Mexico, nor over here in the Caribbean Sea. So more of the action taking a turn like that, and even staying away from the eastern coast of the United States. A couple of tropical waves kind of show up out there, but again, the European model just doesn't seem to be too interested in a whole lot that's out there. The Canadian model, which has usually been a bit more aggressive in developing tropical waves that are out there, this year it's really backed off on a lot of stuff. So other than a couple tropical waves maybe moving here across the Atlantic and maybe an old stalled front here over the southeastern part of the country, again, the Canadian is staying very, very quiet. So let's move on to the icon here real quick. And the icon seems to be a little more robust in trying to develop some waves out here over the Atlantic Ocean, also keeping a lot of moisture there over the eastern Gulf and then along a front here off the eastern coast. But we've got some tropical waves that are trying to work their way farther to the west, maybe affecting the Leeward and Windward Islands. But even the icon model, even though it only goes out 7 days rather than 10 or more like the other models, really, because this big ridge of high pressure is going to be staying out here to the east, anything that wants to develop off the African coast is most likely going to make a turn and should probably stay away from the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic coast. So that's probably one of the better reasons why we're seeing no activity expected from the National Hurricane Center. So with these tropical waves that are currently moving off the African coast, they are still running into a considerable amount of dry air and Saharan dust. These waves really need to develop a lot farther toward the south to kind of avoid some of that Saharan dust there. But there's Saharan dust in the western Atlantic, there's Saharan dust out in the Caribbean as well. And then on top of that, the air mass here for the next couple of weeks is going to stay very, very dry out here over the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. The darker browns that you're seeing there is the dry air. It seems to be getting a little bit more moist out in this area, and the far out runs getting out about 10 to 14 days, and even the southeastern part of the country that's very, very dry right now. Watch how this area here really transitions to more of a green, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. So as we go into the early part of September, maybe some fronts coming across the mid part of the country, but also it looks like a lot more Caribbean and tropical moisture is going to try to work in. So going into the first few days of September, I would expect a little bit more activity to keep going. Wind shear is also a little bit too high, especially out here off the African coast. We've got some very high wind shear that's currently there, and you've got currently some pretty high wind shear along the northern Gulf Coast as well. So unless you're going to try to get something to develop maybe in the Bay of Campeche or out here in the western part of the Atlantic, shear is going to be one of the preventing factors from any tropical cyclone activity. Of course, water temperatures can always support the tropical systems if we can get the right atmospheric conditions, and during the month of September, almost all of the Atlantic Basin is open for business. This is where we look at most of the tracks of the hurricanes during the month of September. Now, most of them do stay over the Atlantic Basin, but occasionally you can get a few of these sneaking into the northern Caribbean or even into the Gulf of Mexico. And as we go through the time period of the hurricane season, we've seen this graphic many times. We're approaching this area right here, but the peak of the hurricane season isn't until September the 10th. And even through mid-October, we're still seeing levels of activity that we're seeing here in the mid part of August. So during this peak here, the higher amounts there, just about 80% of all of our named storms will form during that period of time. And a lot of folks are saying, well, we've only had 5. And if we look at the progress of an average season, today is August the 21st. And as you can see on this list, in a normal season, we usually don't even get our 5th named storm until about August the 22nd, which is tomorrow. So we've already got 5 under our belt, and we're already ahead of schedule. And as far as hurricanes, normally we would have only had 1 hurricane by this particular time, but we've had 3 already, and we've already had 1 major hurricane, which was Beryl, very early in the season back in July. So when you look at these numbers, you can see maybe 4 or 5 or maybe even more hurricanes developing during the month of September. So we do expect things to get busy once again. Will we make 23 named storms or somewhere between 18 and 24 like NOAA had predicted? I can't tell you that just yet, but I think if we reach a normal season, I think that's going to be pretty easy to cover if we get 4 named storms during September and maybe 3 or 4 during the month of October. That's going to take us up to about 13 or 14 just by doing that. And I do expect more development to occur during the month of September and October, just like we always see. So don't let your guard down just quite yet, even though it's been kind of a slow season so far. We really haven't reached the peak of the hurricane season where you start getting 2 or 3 or even 4 named storms out in the Atlantic Basin at the same time. So yes, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, not super ahead of schedule, but when it comes to hurricanes, normally we would have only had 1 by now, maybe 2 coming up by the end of the month, but we've already had 3 hurricanes this hurricane season out of the 5 named storms that we've already had. The next name on the list will be Francine, but I don't think we're going to see Francine coming along for at least a week to 10 days. So at least we've got a chance to rest a little bit, watch these models, and also continue to get prepared for any tropical weather that might come our way. Well, again, I don't have a lot for you today as the tropics stay quiet. Of course, this is something that we like. We don't want a whole bunch of activity out there. If you like this video, please click the like button. Also subscribe to my channel and tell your friends too, and turn on those notifications. That way you know when the morning forecast hits. Acadiana weather today around 7:30 on weekdays, and Let's Talk Tropics will broadcast live each and every weekday afternoon at noon. Hope you have a great Wednesday. Enjoy all this beautiful weather out there, and I will see you tomorrow.